The Christmas morning gift exchange had devolved into the annual career comparison session, with each family member's professional achievements being measured, weighed, and ranked in the invisible hierarchy that governed our holiday gatherings. At 29, I found myself once again occupying the bottom rung of this ladder, the cautionary tale that proved not everyone in the Martinez family was destined for greatness. "Let's see what everyone's been up to this year," Uncle Robert announced, settling into his role as family patriarch with the satisfaction of a man who'd recently expanded his dental practice to include cosmetic procedures. Professional updates, major accomplishments, that sort of thing. The living room filled with the comfortable buzz of successful relatives sharing their victories. Cousin Patricia had made partner at her law firm. Cousin Miguel had opened his third restaurant location. My sister Elena had been promoted to head of marketing at her tech company, complete with stock options and a corner office. And then there was me. "Carlos is still working at that community bank downtown," my mother announced when my turn arrived, her voice carrying the particular tone of maternal pride mixed with gentle disappointment that I'd come to know so well. "Very steady work, very reliable." Uncle Robert's eyebrows rose with interest. "Banking, eh? What's your position there? Loan officer? Branch manager?" I took a careful sip of my coffee, buying time to consider my response. The truth was complicated, and family gatherings weren't always the best venue for complicated truths. "I work in the operations department," I said, which was technically accurate if massively understated. "Operations," Robert repeated thoughtfully. "That's like, what exactly? Processing deposits? Balancing books? Something like that." Patricia leaned forward with the patronizing smile she'd perfected during her law school years. "That's wonderful, Carlos. Banking is such a stable industry. Not exciting maybe, but secure. You'll always have work as long as people need to handle money." The conversation continued around me as relatives shared more impressive updates. Elena described her team's latest product launch, which had generated millions in revenue. Miguel talked about his expansion plans and the investors who were backing his restaurant empire. Each success story was met with appropriate admiration and questions about strategies, challenges, and future goals. When attention inevitably circled back to me, Uncle Robert had clearly been thinking about my situation. "You know, Carlos, banking can be a good foundation for bigger things. Have you thought about getting your Series 7, maybe moving into wealth management? Real money is in investment services, not basic operations." "Robert's right," added my father, who'd spent 30 years climbing the corporate ladder at an insurance company. "Operations is fine for now, but you need to think about advancement. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I considered various responses, all of them inadequate for different reasons. The family gathering had taken its expected trajectory, with everyone offering advice about my career based on their understanding of what my career actually involved. Their concern was genuine, their suggestions well-intentioned, and their assumptions completely wrong. "I'm pretty comfortable where I am," I said finally. This answer clearly wasn't what they'd hoped to hear. A subtle shift occurred in the room's energy, the kind that happens when a family realizes one of their members might be settling for less than their potential. "Comfortable isn't enough anymore," Elena said with sisterly concern. "You're too smart to stay stuck in entry-level positions. The financial industry is evolving rapidly: AI, cryptocurrency, digital banking. You need to position yourself ahead of these changes." Miguel nodded enthusiastically. "Elena's absolutely right. Disruption is everywhere. Look at what happened to traditional retail when e-commerce took off. Banking is next. You want to be on the innovation side, not the side that gets automated away." The advice kept flowing, each family member contributing their perspective on how I could improve my situation. Patricia suggested I consider law school, pointing out that financial law was a growing field. Uncle Robert offered to introduce me to some of his clients who worked in wealth management. My parents wondered aloud whether I'd considered moving to a larger bank with better advancement opportunities. "The thing about banking," Robert continued, warming to his subject, "is that it's all about relationships and trust. People want to work with someone who understands their financial goals, someone who can guide them through complex decisions. You're personable, Carlos. You could probably do well in client services. Assuming he's willing to put in the effort," Patricia added, not unkindly. "Success in financial services requires real commitment. Long hours, continuing education, building a book of business. It's not like operations where you can just punch a clock. I refilled my coffee cup, listening to their analysis of my career limitations with the patience I'd developed over years of similar conversations. They meant well, I knew that. From their perspective, I was underperforming relative to my capabilities, settling for mediocrity when I could achieve more. They were trying to help me see possibilities I was apparently missing. Maybe the problem is vision, suggested Miguel. Carlos, what's your long-term plan? Where do you want to be in 10 years? What kind of life are you trying to build? It was a fair question, one that deserved a thoughtful answer. The challenge was that my actual long-term plan would sound completely implausible to people who knew me as the family underachiever, the one who'd taken the safe route instead of swinging for the fences like his more ambitious relatives. I'd like to stay in finance, I said. Maybe take on more responsibility over time. More responsibility doing what exactly? Robert pressed. You need to be specific. Vague aspirations don't turn into concrete achievements. Elena leaned forward with the expression she wore when she was about to deliver particularly important advice. Carlos, I think part of your problem is that you're not thinking big enough. You're focusing on incremental improvements instead of transformational changes. What would happen if you completely reimagined your career trajectory? What kind of transformation are you thinking about? I asked. Investment banking, Patricia said immediately. That's where the real money is. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan. Those guys make more in bonuses than most people earn in a decade. Miguel laughed. Patricia, those jobs require Ivy League degrees and family connections. Carlos works at a community bank. It's not exactly the same talent pool. That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps people stuck, Patricia shot back. With the right strategy, the right preparation, the right networking, anyone can make that jump. It's about positioning and persistence. Uncle Robert shook his head skeptically. Investment banking is a young person's game. 100-hour weeks, constant pressure, cutthroat competition. Carlos is almost 30. That ship has probably sailed. The conversation had evolved into a debate about my career prospects conducted largely without my input, which was both amusing and oddly touching. They were genuinely invested in my success, even if their understanding of my current situation was fundamentally flawed. Age isn't necessarily a barrier, Elena argued. Lateral moves happen all the time. Carlos has banking experience even if it's operational. That's a foundation to build on. Operational experience at a community bank, Miguel pointed out. That's not exactly the same as experience at Goldman Sachs. Patricia waved this off dismissively. Experience is experience. The principles are the same whether you're handling small business loans or billion-dollar mergers. It's about understanding risk, managing relationships, executing transactions. I found myself in the peculiar position of listening to my family debate whether I was qualified for jobs I'd already held, whether I could achieve success I'd already achieved, whether I had the potential to reach positions I'd already reached. The irony was almost overwhelming. The real question, Robert said with finality, is whether Carlos has the ambition for something like that. Investment banking isn't just about money, it's about drive, competitive spirit, the willingness to sacrifice everything for success. Some people are built for that life, others aren't. What do you think, Carlos? Elena asked. Do you have that kind of ambition? Are you willing to do whatever it takes to make it in high finance? The question hung in the air while I considered my response. I could continue the charade, maintain the comfortable fiction that let them see me as the family member who'd chosen security over ambition. Or I could begin the process of letting them understand who I actually was and what I'd actually accomplished. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it discreetly. Emergency board meeting at 3 p.m. to finalize the Henderson acquisition. My presence required for final approval signatures. I think ambition means different things to different people, I said carefully. This diplomatic non-answer clearly frustrated them. I could see the collective family concern deepening, the shared worry that I lacked the drive necessary to achieve anything meaningful with my life. Carlos, my father said with gentle firmness, your family believes in you. We see your potential. But potential doesn't matter if you're not willing to pursue it aggressively. Opportunity requires preparation and risk-taking. Dad's right, Elena added. You're smart, you're capable, you're reliable. Those are valuable qualities. But in today's economy, valuable qualities need to be packaged and marketed effectively. You need to advocate for yourself. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. The caller ID showed Goldman Sachs Executive Office, which I quickly declined before anyone could see it. But the interruption had broken the flow of their intervention, and I sensed an opportunity to redirect the discussion. "You know what?" I said, standing up to refill my coffee. "I appreciate all the advice. I really do. You're right that I should think more strategically about my career development." This seemed to satisfy them, at least temporarily. The conversation shifted to other topics: holiday plans, family news, Miguel's latest restaurant reviews. But I noticed they kept circling back to my situation, offering additional suggestions and observations about the financial industry. It was during dessert that my phone rang again. This time the call came from my assistant's direct line, which meant it was genuinely urgent. I excused myself to take it in the kitchen. "Mr. Martinez, I'm sorry to interrupt your holiday, but we have a situation with the Henderson deal. Their board is pushing for changes to the acquisition terms, and our legal team needs your approval to proceed with the modified structure. Can you join a conference call at 2 p.m.? I checked my watch. It was 1:45 p.m. "Yes, patch me through now. I can take 15 minutes. Should I conference in the full team? Mr. Goldman wants to discuss the liability provisions, and Ms. Chen has questions about the regulatory filings. Just Goldman for now. We can loop in Chen once we've settled the main structure." The call connected, and I spent the next 10 minutes reviewing acquisition details with one of the firm's senior partners. We discussed liability caps, earn-out provisions, and regulatory approval timelines for a deal worth approximately $2.8 billion. Standard Tuesday afternoon business, except it was Christmas morning and my family was in the next room debating whether I had sufficient ambition to succeed in high finance. When I returned to the living room, Uncle Robert was in the middle of explaining why community banking was a dying industry. "It's all about scale now," he was saying. "The big banks have the technology, the resources, the global reach. Small institutions are going to get squeezed out or absorbed. That's why Carlos needs to make a move soon," Patricia added, "before his current experience becomes irrelevant." I settled back into my chair, half listening to their continued analysis of my career limitations. My phone buzzed repeatedly with follow-up messages about the Henderson deal, but I kept it on silent to avoid further interruptions. The afternoon continued with more family bonding, gift exchanges, and intermittent career advice. Elena shared articles about financial technology disruption. Miguel offered to introduce me to his banker, who might have insights about industry trends. Patricia suggested I consider an MBA program to strengthen my credentials for a potential jump to investment banking. It was all very thoughtful and completely unnecessary. Around 4 p.m. my phone rang again. This time, it was loud enough that the whole room could hear the ringtone, and the caller ID was clearly visible on my screen: Goldman Sachs Partner Office. I hesitated for a moment, then answered the call. "Martinez here. Carlos, it's David Goldman. The Henderson team accepted our modified terms, but they want to accelerate the closing timeline. Can we push everything to next Friday instead of the end of the month?" The room had gone completely silent. Every family member was staring at me with expressions ranging from confusion to shock. "That's aggressive," I said, "but workable. What's driving the timeline?" "Tax considerations. Their fiscal year closes in January, and they want this to impact their Q4 numbers. Our corporate tax team says it's feasible if we can get regulatory pre-approval by Wednesday. I'll call Senator Morrison's office tomorrow. We should be able to expedite the regulatory review given the employment impact projections." "Perfect. One more thing. The Times wants to interview you about the deal for their Sunday business section. Something about mid-market consolidation trends. Should I have them call your office directly?" I was acutely aware of my family's continued staring, but the conversation needed to be finished professionally. "Yes, have them coordinate with Sarah. She can schedule it for late next week after the closing." "Excellent. Thanks for being flexible on the holiday, Carlos. This deal puts us at $42 billion in transactions for the year. Not bad for a December close. Glad we could make it work. I'll talk to you tomorrow." I ended the call and looked around the room at my family's shocked faces. The silence stretched for several long seconds before Uncle Robert found his voice. Carlos, he said slowly, who was that? David Goldman. Senior partner at Goldman Sachs. And you were discussing what, exactly? A corporate acquisition. About $2.8 billion. Patricia's mouth was slightly open. You're involved in a $2.8 billion acquisition? I'm leading it, actually. Elena leaned forward with the intense focus she usually reserved for technical problems at work. Carlos, what exactly is your job title? I considered various ways to ease them into this information, but there didn't seem to be a gentle approach. Managing Director, Goldman Sachs. I head the mid-market merger and acquisition division. The silence that followed was even longer than the first one. I could see them processing this information, trying to reconcile it with everything they thought they knew about my career. Managing Director, Miguel repeated slowly. At Goldman Sachs. Yes. How long have you held this position? My father asked. About 3 years. I was a vice president before that, director before that. Uncle Robert sat back in his chair as if he needed the support. Carlos, are you telling us you're a senior executive at one of the world's largest investment banks? Yes. And you've been letting us give you career advice about getting into finance? It seemed easier than explaining the whole situation. The questions came rapidly after that. How had this happened? When had this happened? Why hadn't I told them? What exactly did a managing director do? How much money was involved in these deals? Was I actually successful at this job? I answered as best I could, explaining my progression through the firm, the types of transactions I managed, the scope of my responsibilities. I told them about the team of analysts and associates who worked under my direction, the client relationships I maintained, the deals I'd closed over the past several years. Wait, Elena said, pulling out her phone. If you're a managing director at Goldman Sachs, you must be. Let me look this up. She typed rapidly, then stared at her screen with wide eyes. Carlos, according to this salary survey, managing directors at Goldman Sachs earn between $2 and $15 million annually. Compensation varies based on performance and deal flow, I said diplomatically. But you're in that range? I'm comfortable. Patricia was running calculations on her phone. Comfortable? Carlos, if these numbers are accurate, you earn more than everyone in this room combined. By a significant margin. The family gathering had transformed into something between an interrogation and a celebration, with everyone trying to understand how they'd so completely misunderstood my professional situation. The same people who'd been offering me career advice an hour earlier were now asking me for financial guidance. I have so many questions, Miguel said. Like, how do you even get a job like that? What's the interview process? Do you actually enjoy the work? And why? Robert added with a mixture of admiration and confusion. Do you still live in the same apartment? Drive the same car? Dress like a bank clerk? It was a fair question. The truth was that success in investment banking came with certain lifestyle expectations that I'd never felt compelled to embrace. The expensive suits, the luxury cars, the flashy displays of wealth. They served a purpose in client relations and peer dynamics, but they weren't necessary for personal happiness. I like my apartment, I said. It's close to work, it's comfortable, and it's home. As for the car, it gets me where I need to go. And clothes. I gestured at my casual Christmas morning attire. Today's my day off. Elena was still processing the magnitude of the revelation. Carlos, you realize this changes everything we thought we knew about your life, right? We've been worried about your career, your financial security, your future. All this time, you've been more successful than any of us. Success is relative, I said. You've all built careers you're passionate about, businesses you're proud of, lives that matter to you. That's what's important. But even as I said it, I could see them struggling to adjust their understanding of family dynamics, hierarchy, and relative achievement. For years, I'd been the family member who needed guidance and support. Now they were learning I was the family member who could provide guidance and support if such things were needed. The afternoon continued with a completely different energy. Instead of career advice, I found myself answering questions about the financial industry, merger strategies, and market trends. Instead of concern about my future, there was curiosity about my experiences and insights about my work. But the most meaningful moment came when my father pulled me aside as the evening was winding down. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Not just for today, but for years of assuming I understood your situation better than you did. You don't owe me anything, Dad. You were being supportive. I was being condescending, he said firmly. There's a difference. I thought you needed my guidance, my perspective, my advice about building a successful career. I never considered that you might have already built one. We talked for a while about choices, assumptions, and the complexity of family relationships when professional success doesn't match external appearances. He was struggling with the same adjustment everyone else was making. The shift from seeing me as the family member who needed help to understanding me as the family member who was quietly, successfully managing a high-stakes career. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the day's transformation. For years, I'd maintained a careful separation between my professional and personal lives, partly for privacy and partly because family dynamics can become complicated when money and status enter the equation. My relatives' concern for my career had been touching, even when it was based on incomplete information. The Goldman Sachs call had forced a revelation I hadn't been planning to make, but perhaps it was time for that revelation anyway. Maintaining two separate identities, underachieving family member and successful investment banker, had become increasingly difficult and ultimately dishonest. Tomorrow would bring the usual challenges of high-stakes finance, client calls, deal negotiations, regulatory compliance, team management. But tonight had brought something more valuable: the restoration of authenticity in my most important relationships, and the relief that comes from no longer managing two separate versions of the same life. The family dynamics would continue evolving as they adjusted to this new understanding of who I was and what I'd accomplished. But that evolution would happen honestly, grounded in truth rather than assumption, reality rather than perception. And perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that the people who love you will find a way to love the truth of you, even when that truth completely reshapes their understanding of your life and capabilities.